3. Screwed it up again.
you keep tanking them, man. My God.
At this point, it's like my brand. One of my favorite guys, Robert Evans, screws up his intro every single time, and I think I'll take a page from his book and pretend like I'm doing it on purpose.
You're not tanking it. You're starting in medias res.
Exactly. It's this is higher authenticity, and we know that YouTube loves authenticity. So the algorithm likes it when you act like you are like just doing your thing. And that's why I'll put out a video of me just writing for 10 hours without saying anything to anyone, and it will go viral.
I was going to do a whole thing where I did the narrator voice and went last time on Homage to Catalonia.
Let's actually do it. So we are on chapter 10 of Homage to Catalonia. I am joined by Bobby B of the Mustache Mafia podcast, formerly the 5x5 podcast. And Bobby, it's been a while since we talked. Do you want to introduce yourselves to the audience?
Hi, everybody. I'm Bobby B from the Mustache Mafia podcast. I'm a guy who occasionally does content and is like way behind on actually doing content, so you probably don't remember me. But
the YouTubes.
I like to talk about philosophy.
The
Ortorbs. The great digital panopticon we've built for ourselves to worship at the feet of capitalism. Anyway, I like to talk about depressing philosophy and history. So this is a perfect project for me. I'm a veteran of the U.S. Army, so talking about war from a veteran's perspective is always kind of fun and wonderfully depressing, as Brenton will, I'm sure, testify to you.
Yeah, and just to be clear to everybody here, you were not like just a veteran of the U.S. Army. You weren't like sitting at a desk. You were a 2-time combat veteran.
I've been to a couple places. I don't like to flex, but.
That's okay. I'll do the flexing for you. So Bobby, this is why I wanted to go over Homage to Catalonia with you, because this is a war story, and it's like a real life war story told by George Orwell, and we are in the second half, which is the most exciting half of the most exciting chapter. In my opinion. So like those of you watching now, this is the episode to really tune into. And having put you on the spot there, let's go. Can you catch up the audience?
Yeah. So chapter 10 was the starting of the street fighting in Barcelona. I almost just screwed up the name of the city, which is really great because I almost called it Catalonia, which is the name of the province. Between the further left revolutionary groups, mostly the anarchists, and the more Marxist Leninist government that's sort of trying to appeal to the better sensibilities of the what we would think of as like the liberal West.
Yeah, it's very important to understand, by the way, in this period. So the Stalinists are supported by the USSR, and they have all of the really good weapons and support, and like they're sending, Russians who are totally not there. They're in uniforms with no insignias on them. They're teaching them to drive tanks and fly planes, which is wonderful because the Republic has none of these, as Franco captured all the war industry and no one else would help them. But also, due to this, and Stalin noticeably, wisely not wanting to piss off the British and the French and the Americans, they are an anti-revolutionary force at this point. They want to roll back the revolution that's already taken place and put the bourgeoisie back in control, because essentially what Stalin wants here is a chance to test his weapons, because he knows World War II is coming, and he wants to see how his people are going to shape up. And also, he wants to get all of the gold from the Bank of Spain, which, by the way, he's completely successful at. They have a huge hoard of gold. He ships it all out of the country and to Moscow, and no one has seen that gold since then.
That was definitely sitting in his dacha just for him to look at.
Yeah,
I want to look at the gold.
yeah. I don't want to be too harsh on him here, but essentially he would probably be happy with winning the war, possibly, and having Spain as kind of a satellite state. But he wants Spain to remain capitalist, to remain bourgeoisie. He just wants it under the control of Russia, and that way he can kind of get his foot in there, but he's not risking war with the United States and the other liberal powers. And to be fair, not possibly pushing them closer to the fascists that he knows he's going to have to fight.
Right.
So that is the larger conflict that is happening here. George Orwell is fighting with the POOM, which is a left Marxist organization. They're like the original post-leftists, so they're really annoying.
That name makes me chuckle like a 12-year-old boy every time I hear it.
The POOM?
Yeah, it just sounds like something else that I won't screw up your algo by saying out loud. But it's close.
It essentially translates to the party of Marxist unification.
Replace the U is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's something else.
Oh, that's good.
But you did miss one thing, because the fascists are doing the same thing, testing their weaponry at the same time. And unlike Stalin, this is going to come up towards the end, so I'll prime anybody who's listening now. Unlike Stalin, they can actually get overland routes into Spain, or easier naval routes into Spain to actually have their troops over. So the fascists are testing their weapons and sending advisors in the same way, but they're also sending tens of thousands of troops into this conflict who are trained and equipped.
Tens of thousands of troops are coming from Italy, and they're coming from the German Condor Legion is coming in. So these are
Portugal,
the Nazis, and Portugal, but nobody cares about Portugal. Come on.
Napoleon did.
No, this is the thing. I'm going to get a bunch of people mad at me about Portugal now, and I'll get people yelling at me on Twitter from Portugal about how wonderful and powerful the fascist Portuguese were.
The uniforms were awful. Fight me.
Yeah. So anyway, so that is the stage that Orwell has involved himself in. Meanwhile, people are coming from all over the world, because also the amazing thing about Spain is that this is the first time fascism is being resisted. And this is very, very, they have rolled over one country after another, and it's seeming like they're kind of megalomaniacs, because they totally were. And so like Spain is the first time like they failed to take control of the whole country because of the anarchists and because of people like Buenaventura Durruti. And so George Orwell arrives along with a lot of other foreign volunteers to fight. And he has been fighting for months at the front, mostly being bored and complaining, but he has had some action. And now the street fighting is just now breaking out between the anarchists and the left Marxists against.
It's hard for us to keep track of it.
Spain is suffering from an attack of letters, just because of all the different parties. So against the Republicans, who are at this point, linked with linked with the Stalinists. So that's about what's about to break out, while all of these allies start fighting behind the lines. And the big issue here is that the anarchist troops, which probably could have come back and won this and defeated the Marxists, even with the help of Stalin, but the anarchist troops are mostly at the front with all the weapons, because if they pull back, that means the fascists advance. So this fight kind of goes down behind the line. So continue. Let's go. When last we heard, people were like bowling with like old bombs and stuff.
Yeah. So somebody had thrown a grenade down the street, and instead of calling, your ordnance disposal technicians, like you probably should in real life, if you ever actually go around high explosives, don't touch them in real life, kids. It's a bad idea. Instead of doing that, these brilliant, heroic militia types were pulling the pins on their grenades and trying to roll them at the other grenade to blow it up. And our boy George had a hold my beer moment where he, except they're out of beer, but hold my tea moment because he's British, walking up to the gentleman and taking one of their rifles and trying to shoot the grenade, missing and giving up. So from that height of martial glory, we're picking back up in chapter 10, where
this is war, people.
This is war. This is actually war, and we've touched on this in every other chapter. Is that like war is like profoundly boring, followed by like punctuated moments of sheer horror. And
it was referred to, and I forget who called it this, but I think it was during the Spanish Civil War, where they said this is not a war, this is a comic opera with occasional death.
Yeah. And even like other wars like World War II, I don't know what the actual months were off the top of my head now, but I was reading in Stars and Stripes of all places, because I hate myself, that the average World War II soldier actually spent less time on the front than they do now in the global war on terror. So there's a lot of rotation in war, is what I'm saying. Or in the Napoleonic era we were talking about for a moment earlier, there were usually only like 2 or 3 battles a year. So if you're in the ranks in those armies, you were only actually fighting for like 2 or 3 days a year, and the rest of the time you're just like bored. So that's something that's throughout the history of warfare, which is exactly what's happening to George, because for the next 3 days after the wonderful bowling incident, he's basically standing guard on the roof of the Poliorama, which is a beautiful movie theater in Barcelona that I definitely want to go to if I'm there.
I'm going to go there one day, hopefully very soon. I have this dream that the Deruti script is they're going to be able to get funding for it, and I'm going to get brought to Barcelona to consult, because that's really exciting.
That'd be a great theater to premiere it in. I think I gave it to you for the description last time, but there's this beautiful observation tower on top of this old-timey theater that I guess they converted into a movie theater, which makes it perfect for the anarchists to put up, or I guess Marxists, to put up guards on top of it, because it can control the street. And unfortunately for George, that's basically all he's doing. He actually even notes, he says, "I was in no danger and suffered nothing worse than hunger and boredom. Yet it was one of the most unbearable periods of my whole life. I can think of few experiences which could be more sickening, more disillusioning, or finally more nerve-wracking than those days of street warfare." So he's literally just sitting on the roof marveling at the folly of what's going on right now. He's sitting in this beautiful observatory, and instead of looking at the stars, he's looking at the city skyline that's still mostly lit. And he notes that a huge town of 1 million people was locked in a sort of violent inertia, a nightmare of noise without movement. The sunlit streets were quite empty, nothing happening except for the streaming of bullets and the barricades and sandbagged windows. Not a vehicle was stirring in the streets. Here and there along the Ramblas, which is the biggest road in Barcelona, I guess, at the time, the trams stood motionless where their drivers had jumped out of them, and the fighting started. So he's frozen in this tower. Everyone in the city is frozen, and it's just this boredom setting in what should be like what we think of as this like action-packed movie moment for him. But really, he's just sitting on top of a movie theater with a loaded rifle, without anything to shoot at.
It's amazing just like what the reality is compared to like Orwell's fantasy of war.
Yeah.
And it's one of the best things about this book. I really like Homage to Catalonia was a life-changing book for me, and I think everybody should read it. And it really, especially if you are involved with the left, you need to read Homage to Catalonia, because all of this shit just keeps happening. And like it really is very much so. Like when I'm in the middle of Occupy and I'm bored and people are being idiots, I'm not just like sitting there like, oh my God, these people are incompetent. I'm like, oh, this is what it's like. Oh,
This is it. Or, people picture American Sniper when they picture the modern global war on terror, when the reality is you're probably sitting on a fob most of the day.
Well, the American Sniper. Okay, so hot take.
Yeah.
I am not at all impressed by the American Sniper, because I know about that freaking Soviet sniper, the woman Ludmilla, whatever her name was.
Ludmilla Pavlichenko.
Yeah, she killed like fucking 300 fascists.
Not men, fascists, is what she said.
There is an awesome Woody Guthrie song about her, like 300 fascists fell by your gun. Yeah. And Ludmilla Pavlichenko, is that how you say it?
Yeah, Pavlichenko. A lot of syllables.
So she kills 300 fascists with like barely a weapon because it's the freaking Soviets and it's World War II. And like this guy's just like, what? He killed like 30 people or something?
I think it was like 200.
200?
Yeah, I think
there's no way the American Sniper killed 200 people.
Chris Kyle, yeah,
Chris Kyle?
Yeah,
I thought it was like in the teens.
I use that as a verb actually when I'm at a gun range. But and I'm googling it now because now
160 confirmed kills.
That's close.
Okay, so I'll tell you what. Let me remember, because I thought it was like 18.
Yeah, no.
160, pretty impressive. But again, with
This,
the weaponry that he has, if a freaking woman from Russia can go in and kill 300 fascists, Chris Kyle, you're on notice.
well, I'll be sure to pass that along to him in the afterlife. Poor guy, but
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway,
It just got dark.
well, I think it got dark when you started comparing body counts there, brother.
Yeah.
But now I'm lost where I was in my book, and it's all yellow, so I can't tell. Okay, here I am.
By the way, we have a comment that my dad knew Chris. He was a great guy. That's
yeah.
good to know.
I'm sure he was a lovely guy, and I don't have any problems with him. I think Brenton is talking about the movie as being an unimpressive movie, and comparatively to like other, we do make a big deal out of our heroes in the United States, and we don't have a very good.
Yeah, exactly. And again, just I'm saying 160 with modern technology versus freaking 300.
well, if you really want to get
To be fair, I would say this. In World War II, there were probably a lot more opportunities to shoot somebody.
Yeah, low intensity warfare, you don't choose much. And if you really want to be freaked out, look up Simo Haya. He's got the actual record.
Simo Haya?
Yeah.
How do you spell that?
Simohaya, I believe.
Oh, there's always a Finn. Yeah, that explains. Oh, whoa.
Yeah. His face or the count, because they're two different things.
I'm seeing his face. Let's see this guy's count. I love this. This is supposed to be about George Orwell, but we're going into sniper counts. Okay. Highest number of sniper kills in any major war. 500!
Yeah.
See, that guy needs a movie.
I think the Finns actually did make one about him, but it doesn't end well for him because you saw his poor face.
Yeah, well,
he took a 155 round. So
they'll do it like Game of Thrones. He'll have like a little scar on his nose.
A little scar on his nose.
Attractive, and he's like, "Yes, I've been disfigured." Yeah, because war is awful and terrible things happen. So now that I have fully alienated the Chris Kyle fans, but also I both pissed off and made the tankies really happy. Yeah. Let's get into Orwell.
I can hear the vodka bottles opening. Anyway, so he notes something interesting here about the city, and this is something that's kind of typical of European cities at the time, and it's becoming more and more typical of American cities too. Mm-hmm. He notes that to the right of the Ramblas was the working class quarters, and they were solidly anarchists, and to the left, confused fighting was going on among the torturous by streets, and that on that side, the PSUC and the civil guards were more or less in control. So think about the city or the town, biggest urban area that's closest to you. That's really typical of American cities. I've personally lived in New York, which is becoming a lot worse about it, but that's really divided by income. I've lived in Newark. The whole city's poor because it's Newark. Savannah was the worst city I've ever lived in America. No, it was a lovely city, but it was for redlining and for dividing the working class and the wealthy. That actually isn't very good for public order. You're probably familiar, if you're listening to this, with the Paris Commune, and the reorganization of Paris right before that commune is one of the things that actually led to that revolt, because it makes the working class people who are living in isolated areas even more resentful and more aware of the fact that they're poor compared to the nicer areas of the city. And it's something interesting to note if you're living in America now, especially as income inequality and the insane real estate market that we're in keeps getting worse and worse. It also tells you kind of that the anarchists are remaining stationary and they're not actually going on an offensive. Mm-hmm. And that while defense is the strongest form of warfare, per Karl von Clausewitz, who I have to quote in every single episode of this show, the only possibility of victory lies in the attack. And if they're just holding their areas, which they're doing right now, they're not maintaining the pace of the engagement, and they can't actually achieve any of their objectives. So that's not a good sign for the anarchists. It's not a good sign for anyone when they start remaining still in a war. If you're paying attention to the news now, our biggest base in Afghanistan is closing. I think it's this month or next month. And the Afghan army is trying to recruit 1,200 soldiers to garrison it, but they're not going to actually go out of the base. They're just garrisoning it. So as things start, they mean to continue as history repeats itself, as Brenton said earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because I mean that is history. Like we keep doing this stuff over and over and over again, and so many people don't realize it.
Yeah, it's crazy. You do in this chapter was actually kind of there was a lot of little wholesome moments in this chapter for me, because everybody, with the exception of the foreigners, are basically sharing like the same culture and the same goal. There's not as much like hatred as there's going to be in World War II coming up in a few years, where it's like wars of elimination. So this next passage kind of made me smile. Kopp had made a definite agreement with them, meaning the civil guards who are camped out in the cafe next door to Orwell. If they did not fire at us, we did not fire at them. We had grown quite friendly with the civil guards by this time and had been going to visit them several times in the Cafe Mocha. Naturally, they had looted.
Hang on. We need to clarify something, though. He is actually wrong in calling them the civil guards. This is the assault guards, not the civil guards. The Guardia Civil are fascists. The assault guards are socialists.
You can see how he would screw that up, though, because there's so many names. He actually makes a joke about that towards the end of the chapter, where he says all the names are like, to him, looking at all the names are like looking at the lists of generals in a Chinese war that he has no way of understanding it. Which is like a little problematic, but
just like, damn, I came here to kill fascists and drink tea, and I don't have any tea, and there aren't any
fascists. I don't have any boots, and I'm on guard duty for 65 hours. God. Naturally, they had looted everything drinkable, which of course they did, that the cafe possessed, and they made Kopp a present of 15 bottles of beer. In return, Kopp had actually given them one of our rifles for one that they had somehow lost on the previous day.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
This is adorable, though. This is even better than that game of soccer in World War I between the Germans and the Americans.
The Germans and the English.
Yeah.
And it almost actually
they're like proto-Americans.
Sort of Gen 1 1.0. Orwell actually starts to try to talk to him. He makes the anti-fascist salute, which I don't know what that is. And he shouts across, "Have you got any beer left?" And the guy says, "No, it's all gone." The same day, for no apparent reason, so this is where it kind of goes a little poorly, a man in the JSU building further down the street suddenly raised his rifle and let fly at me when I was leaning out of the window. Perhaps I was a tempting mark. Yes, you were, George, because you still haven't learned how to duck. I did not fire back, though he was only 100 yards away. The bullet went so wide that I could not even hit that it did not even hit the roof of the observatory. As usual, the Spanish standards of marksmanship had saved my life, and I was fired at several times from this building. So there's some people who are determined to fight, but we're seeing
not the Spanish.
Not the Spanish. Well, it's kind of a trend with them. And I was reading another book that was about Spain in the Napoleonic period. So if I go off on too much of a tangent here, let me know. But Spain never really adjusted to modern warfare. At one point, like in the 1500s, they had basically innovated infantry tactics in Europe with a thing called the tercio, which is a big pike square with musket guys on each corner. And that went out of fashion with the musket. And their army adjusted to linear warfare, but it never really caught up with the other European powers. And they were slow to adopt repeating firearms. They were slow to adopt modern artillery. The only like bright spot of the regular Spanish army in the Napoleonic War was two battles. One where the Spanish managed to rout Napoleon's guard artillery in a counter battery, which is impressive, and another one where they just outnumbered the French like 4-1 and surrounded them. So the Spanish soldiery is not a great standard.
Yeah. By the way, I should mention this. So Spain, in general, it's a fascinating country because it is so passionate. Like just as a country, like the Spaniards just kind of do things, but they also like seem to have like a level of ADD where they don't get like totally devoted to everything. So they just get swept up. And like there's some spectacular cruelty as well. One of the things that was pointed out to me was like even today they torture dogs. They like will torture and kill dogs that they raise just for like a season, then kill them because like it's too expensive to feed them through the winter. But then like at the same time, you know, there's just like this beautiful romance, and there's wine, and it's a wonderful, it's like a wonderful climate. And so you'll find that as this goes on, and this is a bit of a spoiler, but like we all know who won. I think it's one of the reasons why fascism didn't stay, and also why like the sort of totalitarian Bolshevik system couldn't really take root, because the Spanish character just like it doesn't work with their culture.
It is kind of interesting.
Yeah. I've told this story before, but it's really important for anybody who's new and listening. Like, this is when the Russians sent their, like, you know, special forces, like in their freaking cool ass, like black uniforms with no insignia. Like, I'm not really here, comrade. Oh, God. Yeah. That was worse than yours.
Yeah. Duh.
Yeah. And like, okay, so like when they sent that guy, like those guys were sitting there, and like they'd be there fighting the fascists, like on the front lines with the Spaniards, and then all of a sudden it'd get about noon, and everybody would just pack up and walk away from the lines, and the Russians are like, "What is happening here?" And the Spaniards are like, dude, it's time for the siesta. So we're going to take our siesta, and the fascists are going to take our siesta. And then, you know, we'll hear the bells from the church, because the fascists always go to mass first. And then when they're done with mass, we'll come back and fight. And you just imagine these like grizzled World War I Russian veterans who fought in like freaking Petrograd, where like 1.5 million Russians were killed in one day. And they're just sitting there like, oh my God.
Can I go back to Russia? It's winter. But yeah, well, you know,
yeah, so that's Spain.
They're also kind of used to street fighting, and this kind of like revolutionary thing happening, because war is politics continued by violence, and politics doesn't just happen typically overnight. Yeah. And there had been like, I think it was like 4 or 5, they called it Carlist wars, like civil wars in Spain after the Napoleonic occupation, because Wellington basically wrote their constitution, and he wrote it in like a very liberal British way for the time. And the conservative and liberal factions in Spain had been fighting it out over this for years. And this war kind of comes from those. But hilariously, back to George, he notes that almost from the start of this fighting that the food was running short, because we discussed in previous chapters, the left militias weren't really good at logistics, and they hadn't actually stored food for this fight that they knew was coming. Mm-hmm. And they couldn't move food because the civil assault guards, I'm correcting it on the fly now, were constantly sniping into the street, so you can't really move food because they have these great positions. In fact, the CNT and UGT offices were actually facing each other across the Ramblas, and they're just shooting machine guns across the street at each other, which is kind of it's almost something out of like that 90s Judge Dredd movie, or that Simpsons sketch where the two guys in the Old World Trade Center are shouting at each other. But hilariously, as many of them as George notes that as many of us as possible went to the Hotel Continental for our meals. And it's not the Continental for John Wick, even though that'd be awesome. The Continental had been collectivized by the Generalité, and had not, like most of the hotels, by the CNT or UGT, and it was regarded as neutral ground. So he gets to go to this, like, he gets to go, as you were saying a minute ago, he gets to go for his lunch break to the fancy hotel.
And eat, by the way, eat for free.
Eat for free, because it's been collectivized. So, you know, I guess they don't have airline chicken yet, but you might actually be getting cordon bleu. But this is actually really important if you're a fan of Orwell for later, because I swear to God, he meets his inspiration for O'Brien in this hotel from 1984, which is the one of 2 Orwell books that everybody knows. He notes that there's a fat, sinister-looking Russian said to be an agent of the OGPU, which would eventually become the KGB and the GRU, who was nicknamed Charlie Chan, which I don't know how you get that. If you're not familiar with Charlie Chan, it was really kind of like a racist caricature of a Chinese detective from like old British films.
So wait, so they found a Russian,
yeah,
and they named him
Charlie Chan. I don't know how that worked. There's no picture of the guy. I don't know. He wore nicknamed Charlie Chan and wore to his waistband a revolver and a neat little bomb. Some families of well-to-do Spaniards who looked like fascist sympathizers, and 2 or 3 wounded men for the international column, a gang of lorry drivers and some huge, from some huge French lorries, which had been carrying a load of oranges to France and had been held up by the fighting. A number of popular officers. The popular army as a body remained neutral through the fighting, and a few soldiers slipped away from the barracks to take part as individuals. So this Russian guy is sitting there in this hotel while these people are fighting with these French orange smugglers, which is aggressively French. And
dude, I gotta tell you, oranges, especially oranges from that part of the world,
they're delicious.
Blood oranges from Italy. I was born in Naples, and what was shipped over to us from the Italian family that we stayed with, this guy Alfredo, who was like a second father to me when I was very, very little. He shipped us like a box that was labeled like textiles. And my mom gets it, and all she can smell is wine, because he stuffed a bunch of wine bottles in there, and a couple of them have broken, and it's filled with these just wonderful blood oranges. And like, especially at this point, like, I think good oranges in Spain and that's something you're going to kill for. So
well, these guys might have, but so there's this gross Russian guy though, which had me focused on it. He's in there spouting the party line, and it's kind of like offensive if you're really sympathizing with George, that there's this fat Russian dude who's not contributing to anything except to like maliciously propagandize the people. That said, that dude's probably one of the most important people in this conflict because he's characterizing it in the mind of the public. So as odious as this dude is, he's actually probably one of the most effective people in the fighting right now. And we're going to see him a couple more times throughout this and what happens because of the propaganda that he spreads.
Yeah. And the propaganda that he's spreading, if I'm not mistaken, is that the POUM are secret fascists.
Yes, correct. Exactly correct.
Because the left is obsessed with this. Like, first you've got, and partially it's because fucking fascists lie about everything all the time. Like, words mean nothing to them. So, you're dealing with like real fascists who are lying and real secret fascists. And then you've got leftists that get paranoid from that and already hate each other for unrelated reasons. So everybody's like, no, you're a secret fascist. No, it's like this freaking red-brown thing that's been going around here like a while. It's just history repeating itself.
Yeah. And speaking of history repeating itself, he notes that the people regarded the whole affair as a joke, and that they said that this is the kind of thing that happens every year in Barcelona, because there were 3 Carlist wars before this. There was 1833 to 1840, 1846 to 1849, 1872 to 1876, and then the Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1939. So, yeah.
Now, by the way, I should also point out, just before we get any further, because I want to get this out while I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
So what's really important to understand about what's going on in the with regard to like the food supply and especially the food supply, but also like the power and everything else that's going on in the city. So if you read Adam Hochschild, Spain in Our Hearts, and Adam Hochschild is the furthest thing from a radical. He is your regular run-of-the-mill liberal historian who has these ridiculous critiques of anarchism because he doesn't understand it. Even in his book, he admits that the food shortages didn't start until the Soviet Union decollectivized the city and suddenly tried to reinstitute private property. And that's when the black market came back. That's when people didn't eat, because essentially what they'd done was just completely alienated everyone producing the food and shipping the food by rolling back the revolution. So that's really important to understand, like, as things degenerate in Barcelona.
Yeah. And it's also worthy to note that Orwell is talking about how a lot of the reforms of the revolution had been rolled back even before this fighting started. And we were just talking about how there's this really bourgeois fancy restaurant that people go into that's getting food just fine, while there's kind of a little bit of a food shortage because of the fighting. Yeah.
Well, and that's very classic
Yeah, I mean it's typical. I mean, like if there was a food shortage in New York, LeCirque would not be short of pommes frites. Um, provided LeCirque's still open. It's been a minute since I've been in there. He notes that that on the 5th of May, things started to kind of change a little bit. Very few pedestrians are actually kind of starting to come out and be forced to wander to and fro to just get
the basic things that they need while people are shooting at each other.
Yeah, which kind of sounds familiar living in Florida. I was a little ding at myself. Sorry, guys.
That's all right. You've got a monster and a pedo or Ebo file who represent you in Florida.
You've been talking to too many ANCAPs. On Tuesday, he says on Tuesday, the Anarchist newspaper described the attack on the telephone exchange as a monstrous provocation. But on Wednesday, it changed its tune and began imploring everyone to go back to work. The Anarchist leaders were broadcasting the same message. The office of La Battaglia, I'm going to butcher all of the Spanish. I have $5 worth of Spanish, and saying hello, how are you is $2.50. So I'm sorry, guys. The POUM newspaper, which was not defended and had been raided and seized by the civil guard. So again, they're not able to communicate what their goals are to the people of the city, and the people of the city are viewing this as just like another dust up with these dang anarchists who just can't get their stuff together, and they just hate the cops and they're just going to fight the cops. It's not that because their actual goals, he notes, are the handing back of the telephone exchange to the workers and the disarming of the assault guards, not the civil guards. I did it again. And he notes that if they had actually done this, there wouldn't have actually been any fighting. Now, that being said, the goals of the Valencia government aren't to probably cave into any of the militias, because they would view that as an illegitimate usurpation of their central authority. Whereas the militias view handing these infrastructure items over to the workers as the entire goal of the entire conflict. But the message that's being communicated isn't that we, the anarchists, want to hand you guys the infrastructure and hand you guys control over our city. The message that's being communicated is that these darn anarchists just can't get their crap together,
they just can't do it.
They just love fighting cops. Yeah.
Well, and who doesn't, really?
Yeah. So it shows you the importance of propaganda arm in a war. For morale and for like rousing the people to your political cause. This is really.
By the way, this was very key for me to have read again before Occupy Wall Street, because I had this exact experience, like with the press, seeing what Occupy was like on the ground and what the movement actually was and who was involved and where we were silly and where we were very effective, and then seeing the Occupy that didn't exist being repeated like in the press, and not just the conservative press, but all of the press. And that was like another moment where I was like, oh, Orwell was really right about this.
He was. And it's something that's happening geopolitically right now. We're kind of isolated a little bit from it in America because we have a very developed and pervasive culture industry. But the whole global war on terror that's been going on for 20 years and is kind of nominally ending this year for us has been predicated on winning the argument against terrorist groups. And we've done a terrible, terrible job of that internationally. Terrorist groups have been kicking our behinds on social media and in the propaganda arm. China right now is rising as a power, and internationally, its propaganda arm is much more successful than our propaganda arm. We're seeing a micro of it here, but this is something that also happens on the macro scale. So if this is the first time you're being exposed to this, congratulations. You're in for a wonderful, wonderful world of discovering the greatness of propaganda and the pervasiveness of it in the world.
And it's going to get so I remember, like, again, 2010, when everybody was, I was like, oh, we can all communicate now, and we're all going to get the social media will help us rise up and have our own Arab Spring. And oh God.
No,
so wrong.
Go back, go back.
Yeah. By the way, I did want to read this from Munda Skeptical really quickly, so I'm going to pop this up. Nearly all newspaper accounts published at the time were manufactured by journalists at a distance and were not accurate in their facts, but not only inaccurate in their facts, but intentionally misleading.
Yeah, exactly. I had highlighted that same passage. I think it appears a little bit later in the chapter. Adorno, who I also bring up a lot on my content, kind of predicted this, and he was doing work about this at this same time. He notes that a lot of, and this is very simple Adorno to spare you guys like 300 pages of reading. A lot of these capitalist newspapers are more interested in selling you a product and an emotional reaction than they are of actually informing you and uplifting you. So if they think that those facts are going to be kind of inconvenient for the selling of the newspaper, you're going to get a lot of yellow journalism. The United States, like something like 40 years before this, got dragged into the Spanish-American War entirely on the basis of yellow journalism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You provide the photographs, I'll provide the war.
Yeah. Great quote.
And that's again, that's Twitter. That's the news works to make us all hate each other. And it's easy because a lot of us are rubbish.
Yeah.
But really, it works to make us all hate each other and to support powerful structures. I'm not saying you can't not trust the news or don't go and like do the QAnon thing where like you go out and you just trust everybody who's not the mainstream news because they're just as bad, if not worse.
Well, they're selling the same product. They're just selling a crazier product.
Yeah. And a crazier product. I've listened to the QAnon Anonymous podcast and I freaking love it because they rewrite things like the freaking mole children, but it's the Ninja Turtles under New York.
If those dudes like wrote novels, like fiction novels, they would be millionaires. But
yeah, you hear that, Travis View? Write freaking which is not your real name, but your real name is even more unbelievable than Travis View. Get that novel written.
I mean, it'd be better than the Ben Shapiro novel. Anyway,
everything is better than the Ben Shapiro novel.
Somebody actually. Something that actually is important here that a lot of people are probably going to miss. He notes that it was said that the Valencia government was sending 6,000 men to occupy the city and that 5,000 anarchists and POUM troops had left Aragon to oppose them. Even though that's not true, that's not actually happening. It's illustrative of two things that I want to talk about. One is that people exaggerate everything in regular life, and in war and in the military, it only gets worse. I used to joke that if we were going to get telephones at our unit, 6 weeks later we were going to get Tomahawk cruise missiles as the rumor. But them diverting troops, the Valencia government really is actually diverting troops to deal with this. And that is actually strategically very important. One of the big things that kind of led to the downfall of the left troops in the Spanish Civil War was that in 1936, their strength was about 440,000 people, including all of the war material that they had seized. By 1938, their strength was only still about 450,000 people, whereas the fascists in 1936 had about 50,000 regular soldiers, 60,000 gendarmerie, so like the civil guards, and 7,000 Navy. But by 1938, they had 600,000 troops, including 50,000 Italians, 16,000 Germans, and 10,000 Portuguese. So what am I getting at is if you're diverting 5,000 dudes to come off the front, you're diverting 5,000 guys as your army is getting weaker and the fascist army is getting stronger. Mm-hmm. So this is not good for the left in general. In the Spanish Civil War, and it's going to be one of the things that actually leads to the Francoist victory.
One of the beautiful lines, if you listen to Spanish Bombs by The Clash, which I hihighly recommend.
That's a great song.
Yeah, is trenches full of poets. And as a poet, that's a bad situation. There's a few of us like Lord Byron who can make it work. But, when you've got a bunch of freaking poets and intellectuals trying to fight a war, like I'm not saying don't go fight that war, especially, you know, because this was one of the most justified ones. But you kind of need some bruisers.
Yeah, you do. You need, well, not only you need some bruisers, you need some people who are familiar with military science and how to actually carry out the administration of a war, which they kind of sort of have, and they're not going to use them very well. Just counting the 6 rifles that he has on the roof of the movie theater, they had 21 total rifles for their city. They had 50 rounds of ammunition per guy. That goes really fast. A few dozen grenades, and then nothing else except for a few pistols. They said they had a dozen guys, mostly Germans, who had volunteered for the attack on Cafe Mocha if it happened. And they were intelligent in that they said that they should attack from the roof, which actually kind of parallels Russian street fighting doctrine from World War II after they got really good at it. But they had those German guys, right? Mm-hmm. And they're just sitting in the POUM headquarters. The most deadly thing about like a modern special forces soldier, like a Green Beret, isn't his ability to kick down a door and like beat you over the head with a rifle, which he could do very easily because he's a highly trained soldier. The most dangerous thing about a modern special forces soldier is that you drop a platoon of Green Berets in a country, and about 2 months later, they come out with a trained army. So they have these guys that they're using on guard duty who are experienced German soldiers who know who could be training a whole nother army of dudes. Instead, their army isn't growing, and it's so frustrating reading that, knowing what's coming. You're just like, guys, come on, have them be a drill sergeant. Even if the guy can't speak Spanish, you give him a translator. And well, even if he's not speaking Spanish, if a German drill sergeant's yelling at you to do something, I guarantee you're going to figure it out pretty quick.
I think this is partially a factor of like a lot of the people involved with the military at this point don't have much military or any military experience. You know, right. A lot of the officers in the military were on Franco's side. Yep. And those that remained loyal to the Republic that weren't executed by Franco, there's just not enough of them to go around. And again, you know, if the United States and Great Britain and France, especially France, I'm mad at you, France, you're on notice, had backed the Republic against the fascists, great. You know, like there could have been something here. But at this point, their only ally is freaking Stalin and Mexico. And by the way, Mexico, good job, Mexico.
Yeah, it is just absolutely frustrating, and I just dropped my book, so I am sorry. I am trying to find my page again. But yeah, imagine though if they had these German stormtroopers who knew how to like storm a building from the roof, and they had these guys training their troops instead of what we talked about in chapter 1 at the Lenin barracks, with like no formal training. And I've got my place back again, because I am pretty dumb. I am a dumb bruiser, and I drop books. That's what I do, kids.
While you're doing this, so people are asking me if I'm a fan of Nestor Makhno. Oh my God, yes, I am. Nestor Makhno is one of the most amazing historical figures. By the way, he also had a radical book club, just saying. But the coolest thing about Nestor Makhno, beyond the fact that he created the Tachanka, which was just mounted a freaking Gatling gun on a cart and drove it around as freaking chariots. Like, the coolest thing about Nestor Makhno was that he, while Robert finds this thing,
I got it. But go ahead.
Yeah, well, I got to finish the story.
Yeah.
So, Nestor Makhno, with his army of 100,000 anarchists, which started out as 100,000 terrified peasants and a couple of anarchists mixed in, he wound up pulling this move on the White Army. The White Army was kicking the absolute crap out of the Red Army, and they may have actually won because they were very close to being able to march on the capital, Petrograd, St. Petersburg. I think that's the same city. But anyway,
yeah.
Okay, but good.
It became Leningrad.
Became Leningrad, and then Stalin.
No, Stalingrad's a different city.
Stalingrad is different? Oh, well, that's annoying.
Stalingrad's Volgograd.
Yeah, so anyway, what Nestor Makhno does is the White Army comes in, and Nestor Makhno retreats and retreats and retreats and retreats and retreats for like 2 months. And he keeps getting further and further away, and the White Army keeps getting thinner and thinner and thinner because the entire time his goal was to get them divided. and to get them to a chance where he could break them off from their supply lines. And then finally, they do this freaking like last stand at this village, and they've got everybody like, set in around the village. They've got the guns. The whites are coming in. They're going to just massacre them and march on Petrograd. And freaking Nestor Makhno disappears. And nobody knows where he is during this whole battle. They're desperately trying to hold off the whites. And suddenly, Nestor Makhno reappears with some of his best troops mounted on horseback with freaking sabers, because this man is a Cossack, and he obliterates the White Army. And because of that victory, the victory for the whites becomes impossible in the Russian Revolution. Yeah. Like, he won the war for the Reds. And then, of course, the Reds betrayed him, because that's what they freaking did.
It's kind of their MO a little bit.
They do that a lot. I think it's the real politic. They just really like that idea of being like Littlefinger.
They kind of did. They weren't shy about it, though.
No, I'll tell you.
Yeah, like even in the Spanish Civil War, like the Stalinists were not shy about telling them that they were going to eventually replace the workers' militias with the central government here. So be careful about Stalinists, kids. But
and again, if you're a tanky, welcome, by the way. I am not so freaked out by tankies. I will listen to you. I disagree with you a lot of the time, but I'm not so worried, partially because there is no USSR anymore, so I don't think I'm going to get betrayed. But also because I think a lot of you are actually really principled. You just I would say that your personality type has led you to a couple of intellectual pitfalls that sadly, but that doesn't mean there's not a place for you, and we can't argue about shit deep into the night. So continue, Robert, after I pull this to Ukraine. Let's stay focused on
back to Spain. Climate's nicer. So there's a kind of armistice that happens, and the shops actually start opening up again, which is just a very kind of almost a comical scene as the people are kind of going back to like grocery shopping and going about their days. The trams aren't running yet, though. So they know that the fighting's still going and that everybody's still barricaded up. Orwell is actually really upset about this. He says, "I went back to my post on the roof with a feeling of concentrated disgust and fury. When you are taking apart events like these, and this is very true, you are, I suppose, in a small way making history, and you ought to, by rights, feel like a historical character. But you never do, because at such times, the physical details always outweigh everything else. Throughout the fighting, I never made a correct analysis of the situation that was so glibly made by journalists hundreds of miles away, which is what we just discussed a minute ago. What I was chiefly thinking about was not the rights and the wrongs and the miserable intestine scrap, but simply the discomfort and boredom of sitting day by day, night by night, on that intolerable roof, and the hunger which was growing worse and worse, for none of us had had a proper meal since Monday." So that's something that really does happen in war. We tend to think of people who are going through these conflicts as historical characters, and they are to an extent historical characters. But Orwell wasn't thinking about that. No soldier's ever thinking about that in a trench in World War I. They're not thinking of like, my God, the history books are going to remember me. They're thinking, my God, the mud and the BS that I have to put up with. The same thing with Makhno. I guarantee you his Cossack cavalrymen weren't thinking like, oh, the glorious dialectic, comrades. They're probably thinking like, God, my horse smells. I haven't brushed it in 4 days. I just want to take the saber out and get shot, or just end it.
You got to know that like they were going into that like, I'm gonna die. Holy crap!
This is the last step I take. This is the last step I take. This is the last step. Or horse.
Yeah.
The Russians were very committed to the saber. They actually did a couple horse charges in World War I, but that's a whole nother story. He goes back to the hotel, and he notices that among the heterogeneous mob who, for the most part, had not dared to poke their noses out of doors, a horrible atmosphere of suspicion had been growing up. The various people were infected by spy mania and creeping about whispering that everyone was a spy of the communists or the Trotskyists or the anarchists. The fat Russian agent was cornering all the foreign refugees in turn and explaining plausibly that this whole affair was an anarchist plot. I watched him with some interest, for it was the first time I had seen a person whose profession was telling lies, unless one counts journalists, which is hilarious because he's a journalist. There was something repulsive in the parody of the smart hotel life that was still going around behind shuttered windows amid the rattle of rifle fire. The front dining room had been abandoned after a bullet came through the window and chipped a pillar, and the guests were crowded into a darkish room at the back where there was never quite enough tables to go around. But that is the genesis of the O'Brien character in 1984, and I will fight anyone who doesn't agree with me on that one.
I believe that.
But it's also that dude, like I was saying earlier, is the most effective fighter in all of that street fighting. No one's taking buildings, no one's overrunning the ramparts or anything, but that guy in that hotel, as odious and awful as he is, enjoying in the lap of luxury, is winning this battle. Because he's defining the terms and he's defining what the political meaning of everyone's actions is, and nobody else can beat that propaganda arm. And one, he's actually very practiced at it, probably because he's probably a Bolshevik propagandist from way back. And two, he's got the ability to communicate freely because the anarchists' newspaper has been seized and the telephone exchange is under the control of the civil guards.
Well, you think about it and you think about like influencers today.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting that Alan Moore talks about, like Alan Moore told everybody he was a wizard, and he's got a big long beard and crazy hair. So probably. But he talked about how like art and writing is literally magic. Like we've sort of as a society kind of see art and we see journalism as a way to exchange information, and we see art as a diversion, as entertainment. And I think that is really, really bad. It's bad for artists to see themselves that way, and it's really bad for journalists because like what art really is through the manipulation of signs and symbols, you create a change in consciousness in another person. And that's why grimoire, the term for like a spell book, grimoire, that's just grammar. To spell is literally a spell, as far as he says. So essentially what we've got here is you've got a dark wizard in this room in Spain casting his spells, and there's nobody around to oppose him.
Nobody at all.
I mean, Orwell probably could have, because if he had the idea, like if Orwell, because of how good he was with language, he probably could have, but nobody gave him that directive. And, he really wants to be out there like fighting. But like, it would have been very interesting to see like a verbal duel between that guy and Orwell.
It would have, but at the same time, even though they have Orwell, right? And if they had recognized his talent at that point, they don't have the ability to actually project his message anymore. Because they don't have the paper, they don't have a radio. Most people in Barcelona probably don't have radios.
They don't have the telephone exchange.
They don't have the telephone exchange. So one of the things that the Soviets used to do when they would take over towns during the revolution is one of the first things they would build would be a movie theater. And because most of the Russian people were kind of illiterate, not a lot of people had radios, but they could watch the pictures. And they could spread their propaganda that way. But the anarchists have none of this, and the government has all of this. So this is a serious issue. I'm gonna go a little quicker now because I know we've been going for about an hour, and I don't want anybody to fall asleep to the lovely dulcet sounds of my voice.
I'm watching Loki with my wife after this.
Oh, okay, great. I'm protesting Marvel on principle. He's got the last night on the roof, and then the fighting's coming kind of to an end. They didn't know for sure whether or not the Valencia soldiers were showing up, but sure enough, they show up, and they notice that over the telephone exchange, the anarchist flag had been hauled down, and the Spanish Republican flag was flying, and that was the only time that he had seen that so far outside of a fascist trench. So it's kind of like, yeah, we did the revolution, but we're kind of reinstalling the old order in order to have a centralized authority. The Valencian troops that come in are the actual assault guards, he notes. these are guys who are elite assault guards as opposed to the kind of rank and file guys that he's dealing with every day. And he notes that they're assault guards and carabineros. So they're trained gendarmes. They're trained specifically to enforce public order. And they're equipped better than anybody he's seen so far in Spain. They've got, he notes Russian rifles, which we were actually talking about earlier. So I'm going to assume those are Mosin Nagant rifles, which are not the best rifles at the time, but they're serviceable combat rifles for a military at that time. And that every one of their squads has a submachine gun and pistols. So these are serious dudes that are coming into town. They're also physically picked. He notes that they're bigger than anybody else he's seen in Spain so far. That was a thing in the military for a long time, is that they would pick guys who were big to do the brute squad work. And what these guys do when they come into the city is they start carrying out what we would call today a presence patrol. They go around and they're just showing up with guns, and they're showing that they're in charge. They're disarming people when they find UGT, CNT cards on somebody on the metro. They'll tear it up and step on it, and there's nothing they can do about it because there's so much of a presence in the city. So they've sat in their positions. They haven't taken new positions, and with the time that they've given the government's come in with an unstoppable force and just crush these guys. And that should be a lesson to anybody who thinks in a modern country that their AR-15 can stop the government. It can't. This is 1936, and these guys all have bolt guns, and theoretically they should be able to take these guys on, but they can't because these guys are trained, they have doctrine, they know how to move through a city, and they know how to suppress them. Now the gap is infinitely greater. So this is something that you should note. Another thing I wanted to note here is that he's talking to one of his friends in the hotel. He says that the guy's telling him that your papers are saying I'm a fascist, and the guy's like, it doesn't really matter, you just say you're acting under orders. But he's also noting that it's not, there's an atmosphere where you can't just disagree being a member of the POUM versus like the PSUC or the CNT anymore. It used to be that they could all gather together in these little like neutral areas and just have a principled disagreement. But now the POUM is a figure that's, there's actually a political cartoon that has a POUM figure with a mask slipping off, revealing a swastika. And he's noting that they're normalizing the political violence between the factions. That is something that's very bad for a country. That's something that I've seen in some foreign countries where instead of having reasoned debate and talk with each other, we start to normalize political violence. It's something that it's kind of a very worrying trend in America right now. And if you don't want to see street fighting like this in America, which you really shouldn't, because we're discussing how bad it is, you don't want that to become normalized. Like Afghanistan's a great example of that. Recent debate isn't even really on the table in Afghanistan. It's just violence. And if you keep normalizing that, street fighting like this and political violence is just inevitable. People are trying to get Orwell to switch back to the international column, but he's kind of stubborn. He's sticking with the POUM, which I kind of admired about him. He's noting too that the government is just doing mass arrests. His friend Thompson, who had been wounded earlier while he was trying to patch a guy up, somebody had thrown a grenade at this poor man, was flung into jail for like 3 weeks, and he couldn't even lay down in the jail cell. So the government is coming in and they are doing mass arrests and a show of force, and it's working. He's noting that I think you brought this up in an earlier chapter, but a lot of the foreigners knew if they get arrested, they're going to be deported back to France or fascist Italy or Germany. So they're trying to marry local Spaniards to stay in the country. And which, imagine trying to like being so desperate to stay in a country that's at a civil war.
You're in the middle of a civil war against freaking fascists. You're still desperately trying to marry so you don't get sent back and going into the concentration camp. This is the genesis of 1984.
Yes.
Like, people have said that Orwell ripped off 1984 because there was another story or something that he even went and wrote a review of earlier that was eerily similar to 1984. I don't think he ripped it off because, one, he probably didn't remember that and it just stuck in his head. But two, it is this experience that is happening now and that will continue for the next few chapters, which is why you guys should keep listening to this, that directly, like, this life experience is what created 1984, because he saw this stuff like absolutely firsthand, and it will get crazier and crazier as he goes. And you're 100% right that a less principled person probably would have jumped ship and left the POOM and gone to the international brigades. But again, this is Orwell. And this is one of the things that I love about him, is that he is loyal, like, to a fault. You know, so it is invaluable that we have this perspective, because again, like, you hear me talk about Occupy a lot. There's a joke in, like, the Destiny fan community that I do nothing but talk about Occupy, but it is exceptionally important that people understand, like, these aspects of human political organization, because if you don't understand this stuff, you will be manipulated and you will make the same mistakes. And we joke about people, like, making the same mistakes every time, but I'm telling you, like, as dark as this chapter ends, and as exciting as it was with bowling with the freaking bombs, this stuff is happening again, and in some ways it's happening here. And there are people in the United States that want it to happen here, and what I will really say is those are people that don't understand what this means. And I will never forget when I was on my radio show Insurrection with Brenton Lengel with my my co-host at the time, Honorable George Martinez, official ambassador of hip hop, because that's a real position in our government, which I love.
Is it really? I didn't know.
Yes, that. Yeah. He's a damn good rapper, honestly. Though he would probably disagree with that characterization. But George, I remember, like, it came up, like, the subject of political violence and street fighting with Occupy, and George was just like, when violence hits the streets, you do not want to be anywhere near that. So, you know, really, this is a story of Orwell. It's funny. It's engaging, but it is also the story of an absolutely unmitigated disaster. And the disaster was not the revolution, but what happened after the revolution. So again, it's like the moments of some of the biggest and brightest chapters in human history, you know, punctuated by some of the darkest moments, directly experienced by one of the greatest artists in human history, who then went on to be informed by this into one of the most seminal works of fiction that we have ever experienced. So this chapter is the reason why I did this podcast. And it's the reason why you guys should listen, and why you should read this book and understand it. Because if you do, you will have a perspective on the left, and you will have a perspective on activism and politics that you cannot get anywhere else. So it is of the utmost importance that you take a chance to read Orwell, and, like, the real Orwell, because obviously most people in our culture don't know anything about this.
Nothing. And I agree 100%. Like, if you think that you want violence, you don't, because, like Brenton said, and I say this all the time, war is sweet to those who haven't experienced it, is a Roman quote from some dead white Roman guy. But until you've seen the results of this, and I'm not going to upset the algorithm by going into any graphic details, you don't want that to ever happen again. You don't ever want to see it again. It's some of the most horrific things that you're ever going to experience. But that being said, there are actually a couple funny things that happened at the end of this chapter. So I think I'll lift you guys
Great.
up a little bit. He notes some of the most absurd things that he saw are some of the things that stuck with his mind the most, which I'm really glad for George. He said, I look back to the casual contacts I made at one time, sudden glimpses of non-combatants. I remember the fashionably dressed woman I saw strolling down the Rambless with a shopping cart over her arm and leading a white poodle while the rifles crackled and roared around her. It is conceivable that she was deaf. Or the man I saw running across completely empty Plaza de Catalonia, brandishing a white handkerchief in each hand. I'm picturing this poor guy trying to fly. Or the funeral party that he sees a funeral party trying to cross the street and getting shot at by a machine gun and having to run away. But the best part is that at the end of this, he has to take his rifle down off of the movie theater roof that he's got. And he can't carry it openly because the civil guards will just take it. But he also can't disassemble it because he's carrying a Gewehr 98, which is about 50 inches long. as a rifle, right? This is a big, long rifle. It's about half the size of a man. And he doesn't have a screwdriver to take it apart. So what he has to do and what his friends have to do is they have to take these rifles and stuff it down their pants, their pants legs, and walk like Charlie Chaplin down the street. And he's saying that all these people must think he's a lunatic. And I'm like, all these people know you have a rifle and they just don't care at this point. They just want it to be over. But the next chapter, he's going to discuss the political ramifications and causes of this. And he does actually give you that slightly problematic but funny warning at the end of it. He says, as before, if you're not interested in political controversy and the mob of parties and sub-parties and their confusing names, rather like the names of the generals in the Chinese War, please skip. But I actually think this is interesting. And the next chapter you're really going to want to listen to get the background of this. And as we discuss the politics of this, you're going to see that not a whole lot has changed from the 1930s to the 2020s in terms of like material motivations of politics. And that's what I got for this chapter. And I hope you guys have enjoyed the wonderful dulcet sounds of my voice. I was going to do it in a narrator voice like this, but I decided not to.
You have a good radio voice, and I say that as somebody who was on the literal radio.
I have a face for it.
You accidentally turned on your camera once. I will agree with you.
Yeah. Oh, brutal.
All right. So this has been Insurrection with Brenton Lengel, Homage to Catalonia, Chapter 10, Part 2. We're at the end. And, this is the most exciting chapter, in my opinion. But at least in terms of like the actual action set pieces, like this is the chapter that they shoot for a movie. But we do have some just fascinating bits of political intrigue as you see the anarchists suppressed by the Bolsheviks, and what happens, and then of course the Bolsheviks get around to promptly losing the war. And I've said this before. There were two things that doomed the Republic. The first, and the funny thing is I actually reached out to HBO in like season 3 of Game of Thrones, and I was like, "You need to hire me. I want to write a peasant revolt that takes over Casterly Rock," and I would have created a leader that was like half Buenaventura Durruti and half Boots Riley, and it would have been phenomenal, and I would have killed them all horribly.
Well, that's sort of what the Brotherhood Without Banners was supposed to be.
Well, they devolved into religious fanatics, but like I would have written that. It would have been freaking amazing. And under no circumstances would HBO have ever let me write that. But the point is that the things that doomed the anarchists would have been the same things that doomed the anarchists in this story, which it was one, being tragically ahead of their time, and two, not being able to compromise, because a huge thing was, and I don't know how much compromise would have really actually helped, because, for instance, and this goes more into the tragically ahead of their time, the regular Republic, even before Stalin was involved, again, couldn't get international help against the fascists. So even when they're being the exact same style of liberal capitalist government, they won't help them. But Spain needed international help from America, they needed it from Great Britain, and they needed it from France, and they were left high and dry on everything. That said, also the other major issue was simply they did not have the experience and they did not have the weapons to win this war. And the only way that they could have done it, in my opinion, was that if they'd just gone straight up, like full on assault and captured the war industry in the South. But the only reason they would have done that was if they had omniscience and they knew how bad things were going to get and they knew no one was going to help them. The other thing that I will say about the reason that they lost, and this is on the Stalinist side, that part of it was Stalin wasn't interested necessarily in a communist Spain. He just wanted primarily to test his weapons and get the gold. And a communist Spain would have been nice. But what they did when they came in is they killed the revolution. And when they killed the revolution, they killed the reason people were fighting. And we saw this again when Hillary Clinton squeezed out Bernie Sanders in 2016. And you saw the disaster right there. The fascists won again. And people seem to think, because when we are stressed, this is like an actual like psychological phenomenon, people think in more authoritarian terms, and it makes sense evolutionarily. You look for a strong leader when you're worried about your life, because humans can then group and we can fight more effectively, but it's an illusion. And what you really need more than anything else, and Robert, I think you pointed this out at the beginning, is you need that enthusiasm. So if you kill that in the name of efficiency and doing things the proper way that they have always been done, if you kill that, you will lose. So I think that those are two major lessons that I think every revolutionary movement, if it comes to that, if we wake up one day and the military's gone fascist, you need to remember these lessons from Spain. And again, this is here. It's for us in history. Orwell gave us a gift by risking his life to acquire, what he acquired to tell this story. And people really, really need to recognize that and make it a part of their worldview. Even if you're not a radical, you just have to understand this period, because it is fascinating and it is so incredibly relevant to everything that we are dealing with today. All right, so Bobby, we are at the end. I love that you ended us on a positive note there. I love, what, I'm just imagining that the woman was just totally badass, as opposed to
she's like, I want my groceries and this dog needs a walk. Let's do this. I'm stupid. Let's do it.
That now honestly reminds me of my mom, particularly with the dog needs a walk. Well, for those of you who don't know, my mom raises like world-class Newfoundlands.
Well, if you ever need to intimidate someone, just tell them you're stupid. It gets them. Stupid. I'm stupid. Let's do this. I'm fucking stupid.
Yeah. I will remember that if I'm ever in another life or death situation. Yeah. All right. So Bobby, what would you, let's hear.
Oh, I'm Mustache Mafia on YouTube. I'm Mustache Bob 2 on Twitter. I am hopelessly behind on actually doing my own content. I am working on a series on the it's topical now, but I'm hesitant to get it out until I'm really ready for it. I'm working on the history of the cultural Marxism conspiracy theory and how it's relevant to us today. People are passing laws about it. I'm working on another history.
Publish that when you're done. In fact, talk to me and I'll find a way to help you get it published.
Yeah. It's really crazy. I'm reading about William Lind and it's really depressing. I'm working on a couple other things about electoral politics, and I want to do a regular book club on my channel. I'm probably gonna, after we're done with Orwell, I'm probably gonna do something happy as a palate cleanser, and then I'll be back to the depressing philosophy. Thanks guys for listening to the sounds of my dulcet voices, and thanks Brenton for having me on the channel.
Absolutely. And this is Brenton. I'm Insurrection with Brenton Lengel was my previous radio program. I am now on YouTube because I like people seeing my face. If you can, go see the most recent upload that I did with Bobby and like it, because like a bunch of, fascist dillweeds ran in there and like mass disliked our video on Cyberpunk 20.
Oh, for real?
Yeah. It's got like this huge and it was because they tried to ratio a debate and failed.
Oh,
and got mad, and they were just like saw this video nobody was paying attention to, and so like, we're gonna ratio it this one.
Jokes on them. The dislikes help the algo too.
Yeah, it really does help. They're freaking idiot. Fascists are stupid.
Yes, they are.
But yeah, do check that out. Also, by the way, it is in the description here. The Kickstarter for Snow White Zombie Apocalypse #4 launched on Tuesday. We are less than $1,000 away from making goal. And the more, even if you can only pledge $1, even if you can only give it a share, everything helps the algorithm. And this issue is going to be freaking incredible. And once this is done, we're going to be moving on to my next project, which is a comic about the life and death of Buenaventura Durruti, which I'm super excited about and has been optioned as a film as well. So, there's some really cool stories and comics that are going to be coming out of this channel, and they are relevant to all of your wonderful radical, predilections. So, actually, if I say radical predilections, it sounds like I'm talking about fetishes.
Everything does.
Everything comes back to that.
Everything does.
It's funny.
Why do men build bridges?
It's really funny. Somebody messaged me, and they were like, because they've been talking to TERFs, and I'm like, please don't. And they were like, hey, so what's this thing with like autogynephilia? Is that why men are becoming women? Because they really are just hot for the idea of being a woman. And I'm just like, no, that's not why would anyone do that? And go through the bull crap that you have to go through with being a trans woman, just to get off a couple of times. One person will do that.
I only have 4 cigars left in the house, man. Don't make me smoke all of them.
All right. Well, this has been wonderful. I'm going to go watch Loki. Please go check out Bobby B and follow him. Go to the Kickstarter, pledge, share it. Thank you guys very much. We will see you guys again very soon. I've got some other debates in the pipeline. I just got to get this Kickstarter out of the way. And I have another big video coming out that I'm working on. So, and that may be sometime in the next few weeks to, 3-4 weeks. Just my life has been taken over by real life. And look for the next episode of Radical Book Club, Homage to Catalonia. And maybe when we're done, we'll read Anarchy's Cossack. That's
a good book.
All right. I'll catch you later.
All right. Bye-bye.